Draw them in immediately. If my night driver hadn't taken the wrong turn that evening, I would have opened my front door and stepped into a situation I might not have survived. Tome, my name is Lydia Morgan. I'm 62 years old, and this is a true story from Los Angeles. The loss, soft grief, restrained emotion. Don't rush this section. 6 months before that night, I stood beside a hospital bed in Glendale, holding my husband Daniel's hand as the machines around him slowly went silent. I remember how cold the room felt, or maybe it was just me. My fingers wouldn't stop trembling, even as I told myself to be strong. There is a particular kind of grief that lives in the space between someone still being there and them being gone. I stood in that space for what felt like hours, afraid to let go of his hand. We had been married for nearly 4 decades, long enough that I had forgotten what it felt like to fall asleep alone. Long enough that his absence didn't just feel like loss. It felt like a piece of myself had been quietly removed. Daniel taught high school history. He had a gift for making the past feel urgent, personal, alive. I spent most of my life working as a legal records assistant. Quieter work, careful work. We were different in that way. He filled rooms. I kept things in order. When they were passed away, the insurance barely covered the hospital bills and the funeral. I remember sitting at the kitchen table with a calculator and a stack of envelopes, doing math that didn't add up no matter how many times I tried. There is a specific loneliness in financial fear. It lives in your chest, low and persistent, like a sound you can't quite hear, but always feel. Act 2. The isolation. What remained disappeared quickly. Property taxes, utilities, and the simple cost of surviving in a city that doesn't pause for grief. I moved back into the small bungalow Daniel and I had purchased years earlier in East Los Angeles, back when the neighborhood still felt hopeful. Now the paint peeled from the porch rails, the streetlights flickered at night, and the silence inside the house felt heavier than noise ever had. I would catch myself setting 2 cups of coffee in the morning before remembering. Small moments, unbearably ordinary. Our son lived in Nevada. He called occasionally, but time and distance had slowly stretched the space between us. Grief has a way of widening gaps that were already there. I never blamed him, but the phone calls felt shorter every month, and I found myself rehearsing things to say before I dialed. Retirement wasn't an option, so I took a night job working at a private legal records archive downtown. It wasn't a law firm. It was a quiet storage facility that kept civil case files, sealed depositions, and legal evidence for ongoing litigation. My responsibility was simple: log files, confirm the chain of custody, and flag anything that didn't match. The work demanded focus and confidentiality, and it paid just enough to keep me afloat. Some nights on the bus ride home, I would press my forehead against the cold window and watch the city lights blur past. I told myself I was fine. Most of the time, I almost believed it. Slightly warmer, but still cautious, the first light in darkness. My shift ended at 11:45 p.m. For years, I relied on the bus system. Then the routes changed. The last bus began leaving before my shift ended. Walking through downtown Los Angeles alone near midnight wasn't something my body or my nerves could manage anymore. My son insisted I download a rideshare app. I resisted for weeks. I didn't like the idea of climbing into a stranger's car in the dark. It felt like trusting something I had no reason to trust. Until I had no choice. That's how I met Aaron. The first night his dark sedan pulled up outside the archive building, I hesitated. My hand stayed on the door handle for a second longer than necessary. The street was empty. He looked to be in his early 50s, with tired eyes and careful movements. The kind of person who looked like they carried something heavy, but had learned to carry it quietly. His rating was perfect. 5 stars, hundreds of rides. I climbed into the back seat and gave him my address. "Long night?" he asked quietly. "Every night," I replied. He nodded like that answer explained everything. And somehow, it did. Over the next several weeks, Aaron kept accepting my rides. Same nights, same time, same calm presence. He didn't push conversation. He didn't ask personal questions. But he noticed things. When I seemed shaken, when I was unusually quiet, when I looked cold. There was something deeply human in that. Being seen, without having to explain yourself. In October, I began bringing tea with me, chamomile in a travel cup. It was the one small comfort I allowed myself on cold nights. One evening, I handed him a second cup. I'm not sure what made me do it. Maybe it was gratitude, or loneliness, or simply the instinct that warmth should be shared. "You don't have to do that," he said. "I know, but nights are long." He accepted it without ceremony. That mattered more than I expected. By November, those 12-minute rides were the only face-to-face conversations I had most days. I hadn't realized how isolated I'd become until I noticed that Aaron's question, "Long night?" was often the only voice I heard outside of work. That realization sat with me uncomfortably for a while. Then I stopped fighting it and simply let the rides be what they were, a small, real human moment in a very solitary life. Appreciation, but now with a thread of tension underneath. Aaron remembered everything. My routine, the flickering porch light, even which nights I double-checked my locks. He never made me feel watched. He made me feel considered. There is a difference, and it matters deeply. What I didn't realize was that someone else had been paying attention too. And the night Aaron missed my exit, the life I thought I understood split open. That was when everything began. The noticing. Aaron rarely started conversations, but when he did, they were never meaningless. He asked thoughtful questions, then waited patiently for answers, the way people do when they actually want to hear them. One night, he told me he had spent almost 20 years working as an electrical systems technician maintaining commercial buildings. A scaffolding accident crushed 2 vertebrae in his back. The company settled. The job disappeared. The pain stayed. He said it without self-pity, just facts delivered plainly. But I heard what was underneath them. The grief of losing a career you had built with your hands, and the quiet determination to rebuild something, even if it looked different. Driving nights paid the bills. It also allowed him to check on his aging mother every morning before sleeping. Her memory was slowly fading. Aaron organized his entire life around caring for her. He never complained. He simply stated the facts like a man who had already accepted them and chosen love anyway. I understood that kind of love, the kind that asks nothing back. As weeks passed, I realized Aaron wasn't just remembering my address. He was noticing patterns. Which nights I stayed late, when my porch light was off, when the street seemed different. I noticed his noticing, but I didn't ask questions. I suppose I was afraid of what the questions might uncover. One night he mentioned a car parked near my house that he'd seen several times before. I laughed it off. Los Angeles is full of cars that never move. He didn't argue. He simply nodded. But something in his expression stayed with me, careful and still. The way a person looks when they know something and aren't sure yet how to say it. Another evening, he asked if I ever brought work home. I told him no. Files never left the archive. Everything was logged, everything tracked. He looked relieved, genuinely, visibly relieved, in a way that, looking back, should have told me something was already wrong. What I didn't know then was that Aaron had recently driven a passenger who talked too much when drunk. A man complaining about audits, about missing files, about someone in records asking too many questions. A man who repeated my street name, like he was memorizing it. Aaron hadn't said anything to me yet. I wonder sometimes what that silence cost him. The weight of knowing something dangerous and waiting for the right moment. Carrying it alone, night after night. The wrong turn. The night everything shifted. Rain had just begun falling. A thin drizzle smeared the city lights across the windshield, turning the street into something blurred and uncertain. I handed Aaron his tea as usual and waited for the familiar turn toward my street. The warmth of the cup in my hands, the smell of chamomile, the routine that had come to feel like safety. But the car kept going. At first, I thought it was a mistake, a distraction. Then the silence stretched too long. "Aaron," I said gently, "you missed Cedar." He didn't answer right away. His jaw tightened. In the rearview mirror, his eyes held something I hadn't seen before. Not fear exactly, but the look of a person who has been preparing to say something difficult and has finally run out of time to prepare. "I need you to stay calm," he finally said. "And I need you to listen carefully." My stomach dropped. The cup of tea suddenly felt very fragile in my hands. "You're scaring me." "I know. But what I'm about to tell you would be worse if I said it outside your house." I said nothing. I just held the cup. Outside, the rain kept falling. He parked in an empty office complex parking lot. Rain tapped softly against the windshield. The only light came from a distant street lamp, casting everything in pale amber. We sat in the kind of silence that has weight. "A man named Victor Hale," Aaron said. "Does that name mean anything to you?" The name felt strangely familiar. The way something does when you've seen it written down many times, without ever speaking it aloud. A cold tightness moved through my chest. "I've seen it in files. Why?" Aaron showed me his phone, notes, dates, fragments of conversations he had quietly recorded, months of careful, silent documentation. I scrolled through the screen with unsteady hands, the words blurring slightly because I couldn't make myself read them clearly. "He's mentioned you several times." My pulse quickened, not the fast panic of a sudden scare, something worse. The slow, deepening dread of understanding something you cannot undo. "Last Friday, he said your full address." My mouth went dry. I looked at Aaron and he looked back at me, steady, waiting for me to absorb it. "And tonight," Aaron added quietly, "his car was parked outside your house." I don't remember what I said next. I remember the rain. I remember my hands shaking. I remember Aaron placing his hand briefly over mine. Not romantic, not performative, just present, solid, human. "We're calling the police now," he said. The revelation. Procedural at first, then deeply personal and chilling. The rest of the story unfolded quickly. Police reports, audio recordings, search warrants, and a discovery none of us expected. Victor Hale wasn't just watching me. He worked contract security at the archive building, which meant he had access to the records, and he knew exactly when no one would notice files disappearing. But there was something else, something that made my throat close when I heard it. Years earlier, my husband Daniel had testified in a fraud case that cost Victor Hale his contractor license, a case that destroyed his career. And apparently, he never forgot. While I had been grieving Daniel, while I had been learning how to survive without him, this man had been building something in the dark. Not grief, rage, methodical, patient, cold. I sat in the police station that night and thought about Daniel, about the kind of man he was, a man who believed in telling the truth even when it cost him something. And now, years later, his truth was still reaching forward, still shaping lives, still, somehow, protecting mine. The evidence. Victor Hale was arrested that same night. When police searched his garage, they found altered legal documents, stolen files, and detailed notes about my house. The layout of the yard, which window faced the street, what time my lights usually went off. There was even a list labeled contingency. My name was on it, and next to it was a date. That night. If Aaron hadn't changed the route, I would have walked straight into him. I have sat with that sentence many times since. It doesn't get easier, but it no longer frightens me the way it once did. What I feel now, when I think of it, is something closer to gratitude, enormous and quiet, the kind that can't fully be expressed. Act 8, Justice and Aftermath. The trial lasted several weeks. I attended every day. I wanted to be present for it, not out of anger, but because I felt I owed it to Daniel, to Aaron, to myself. Aaron's recordings became key evidence. His notes created a timeline prosecutors could prove. Victor Hale was convicted of financial fraud, evidence tampering, stalking, and attempted unlawful entry. He received a sentence long enough that he will grow old in prison. When the verdict was read, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt something quieter. Relief, yes, but also a profound sadness for the years of hatred Victor Hale had chosen to carry, and how much it had cost everyone, including himself. Healing. Life eventually settled into something new. Not the same as before, but new, in the way that things become after they have been broken open and slowly put back together. Aaron still drives nights, but now I sit in the front seat. Sometimes we talk, sometimes we don't. The silence between us is easy now, the kind that only exists between people who have been through something real together. His son, who he hadn't spoken to in years, reached out after hearing about the case. They're rebuilding their relationship slowly. Aaron told me about it one evening without much commentary, but I saw the way his shoulders were different when he spoke. Lighter. As for me, I still live in my small bungalow in East Los Angeles. I still work night shifts, and I still bring tea when my hands shake. Old habits from old grief. But the bungalow feels different now, less heavy. I repainted the porch rails last spring, a deep blue that Daniel would have teased me about. I think about him still, but differently, less like missing and more like carrying. He's with me, in the choices I make, in the way I show up for people. But I don't believe I'm invisible anymore. The lesson. Because I learned something that night. Kindness creates connection. Connection creates awareness. And awareness can save a life. Sometimes the smallest gesture, like offering someone a cup of tea, can quietly change the ending of someone's story. And sometimes, the person you think you are helping is already, quietly, helping you. My name is Lydia Morgan. I'm 62 years old, and this was a true story from Los Angeles.